Hello and welcome to Mr. Clark After Dark, everyone. My name is Lucas Clark and I am a certified educator with Alberta Education and the Alberta Teachers Association. All conversations and interactions exchanged is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. In no way does the content discussed intend to be in violation of the ATA Code of Conduct or meant to target any individual student, teacher, or to belittle or demean the profession in any way. If you have something that you would like me to discuss or have a story of your own to share, please reach out at lucasrdclark97@gmail.com. You can also send a direct message to me on Instagram at Mr. Clark After Dark. Hope you enjoy the show, and please do not forget to subscribe. And now, on to the show. Hope you all enjoy. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Mr. Clark After Dark. Today I have on the second part of the conversation with the one and only Tim Coates. Tim is a former Diploma Exam Manager for Social Studies in Alberta. He is currently a Sessional Instructor on Assessment at the University of Alberta and has been in the teaching profession for more than 40 years. On part two of our conversation here today, Tim and I discussed the case for keeping standardized testing, the Friends of Standardized Testing Club, which does not actually exist, developing meaningful summative and performance assessments, finding different ways to teach the core essay and core writing skills, how to teach differently if there were no diploma exam, not teaching to the test even in a diploma course, how he would alter his methodology for teaching writing if in the classroom today, the quote-unquote reading comprehension criticism of the social studies diploma, why political cartoons became part of the standard and how they may be losing their utility, the concerns and potential opportunities over the diplomas becoming digitized, how even after 30 years away from the classroom, Tim still has nightmares about being a high school teacher and having nothing prepared and just the absolute anxiety attack that comes with it, and of course, much more. Thank you all for tuning in, and I really hope you enjoy the show.
So group work's great.
Yeah. Well, and so only the reason I bring it up is because as you're kind of going through these, when it comes to when you deliver a performance assessment, you're giving them pretty much the guidelines of how to get 100%, right? So if you give them a lot of time to do it, they do everything you ask, and you give them 100%, well, then you can kind of start to see like the slight inflating of grades a little bit, where you kind of get into those situations where you have the 80 in the course, the 50 on the diploma. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I guess it comes down to more concise rubrics, but obviously that's kind of one of the things that we've been talking about, of how to make things more individually relevant to where you actually are versus just giving you an assignment.
Yeah, I think two things can kind of, if we want to use the word inflate the grades, I have a little bit of discomfort with that. But one is group work, potentially, particularly inflating the grades maybe of students who really heavily rely on strong people in the group to do well.
Yeah.
The other is, and I don't mean this to say it's bad, but is formative learning, formative assessment. So if you were an English teacher, for example, and you gave the students an essay on Shakespeare or something, to do with Shakespeare, and the students do the essay, they hand it in, you give them all kinds of feedback, say, I'm not marking this one permanently, go back, make these changes, come back, and they do, okay, it's getting better, but go back, make these changes, come back, and let's say they do it about 4 times, and the 4th one comes in, and now you say, okay, good, perfect, I'm going to mark this one. Well, what are you marking? You're marking the student's product, but how much of that is still the student's product, and how much of that is simply your edits the student has woven into that essay? And this is where I say formative assessment is quite compatible with summative assessment, including standardized testing. If you really truly got that student to the point where now they can do, we'll use a social example, now they can do analysis, now they can look at 3 sources, find out the relationships, talk about each source and what it means, and then what's the relationship among the sources. If you've really got them to do that from all these formative processes you've done, they walk into a diploma examination, should have full confidence and full ability to be able to demonstrate that. You as a teacher, if you take and mark the 4th iteration of that and put that mark in the mark book, you probably shouldn't have a lot of confidence that that's truly where the student's at. That's where the student's at with a lot of your guidance.
Yeah.
Right? So even as a teacher, if you said, okay, folks, we've been studying Romeo and Juliet, and I had you do those essays. That's all good. Now you saw it. Now you're on your own. We're going to do Hamlet now. I'm not going to help you. Prove to me that you learned those skills of analysis or whatever the particular skill was that you were developing in the writing. Show me you can do that now, right? And life is full of examples of that, right? You get all your formative training as a pilot, so if that situation comes to bear where the pilot now all of a sudden is going to make some critical decisions to make sure the plane stays in the air or gets on the ground properly, a whole bit, that's what all that formative training was done. That's where the rubber hits the road, is can you do it now? Free from the guidance of your teacher, free from the guidance of your flight instructor, whatever it is, right? And that's where I think we're always trying to...
gradual release of responsibility.
Well, I think ultimately the ultimate responsibility of teachers is we're pushing these little birds out of the nest. We're saying, okay, you got the security of the nest here, and I'm going to help you, and we're going to get your wings working and the whole bit. You can always fly back in the nest. At some point, you're out of the nest. You've got to fly on your own. And that's one of the things we have to do as teachers. So when there's gaps between diploma marks and school awarded marks, some of that, there could be other reasons for it. So I don't want to say it's purely because of formative learning, purely because of group work or anything like that. There could be a number of reasons for it. And some of it could be the anxiety some students face in doing a one-time composition or something like that. But I always felt comfortable as a teacher that my goal was to give the students the confidence and the ability to be able to think that they could walk into that exam and do it. They could go in there, they'd be fine at that exam the whole day.
Yeah, because the goal is, because even now we pretty much simulate the same conditions for all of our major essay writing, especially with ChatGPT. Another struggle is trying to convince students the value of being a good writer and what it actually provides for you. That's been quite the conquest, I think, and that's kind of why I wanted to start out saying, what is the purpose of social studies? How would you, on day one, if a student asked you, what is the purpose, what do you say? Because usually we had that civics discussion, and I'm always saying, oh, well, it's critical thinking, it's being able to articulate yourself appropriately, and I always pretty much say, the better writer you become, the better thinker you become, and then all the decisions you make are kind of your second and third draft, not your first draft. That's kind of the way that I've gone with that. But yeah, that's kind of the main thing for looking at that aspect. But if you were a new teacher today, and let's just say it's your first time teaching 30-1 in a diploma course, what is kind of the advice that you would give of how to prepare your students for that exam?
I think it's still going to come down to that idea that you're going to help them build their own toolkit that they're going to use when they get into that exam. I'll give an example, and this is, again, I was pretty young in my teaching when I started having the students do debates, because I just was kind of a big fan of debates. And so I took the formal debate structure and I had to compress it a little bit simply because of time constraints in the classroom and the whole bit. And for quite a few years we did them in grade 11 and grade 12. And at that point, the composition on the Social Studies 30 exam was a position paper, right? And you would be amazed how many times the kids would come out of the diploma exam and say, Mr. Coates, that was great. The essay topic was exactly what our debate topic was. And I go look at the essay topic, and no, it wasn't. Not at all. But I had given them, I felt, the confidence that they could go in there and write that composition and feel they'd been trained to do that. And so when they came out, I wasn't worried. I wasn't thinking, oh, no, here we go. They think they did great and they probably did terrible. No, I was pretty good at, okay. They felt good about what they did. I remember one time a student said to me, because we were doing these debates, and we always did them typically the last about a week of the course before we had to wrap everything up. And the student said, Mr. Coates, we're going to be writing a diploma examination here in a few days. Why are we doing these debates when we should be preparing, for our essay? And I said, you are preparing for your essay. He said, well, what do you mean? We're doing debates. I said, precisely. What's the difference? What's the difference whether or not the means by which you learn how to critically think and to make argumentation and find support for that argumentation is through a debate or through it's a written composition? I said, when you go to write your essay, think about what you did in your debate. Were you challenged in things? Did you have to defend things? Did you have to come up with examples to defend those things? Well, essentially, that essay question is doing the same thing to you. It's saying, prove your point and defend your point.
So, and that's kind of the way I've got in my teaching. Like with grade 12, I always start with a controversial issues project where you're trying to, I had a professor in university who did it where whatever issue you wanted to work on, you didn't know what side of the debate you were arguing until the day you came to that class. So that meant you had to equally prepare for both sides, kind of doing that kind of full investigation. Then I flip a coin and I'm like, oh, Tim, you're arguing for abortion today. Even though you're like completely adamantly against it, you're like, okay, I'm going to straw man it as much as I can and pretty much give that advice. But then that literally shows them, especially with the left and right spectrum, because we usually do like a bit of a discussion on that first as well, to kind of apply that before getting to the position paper. I find that has helped a little bit. But I guess the problem then becomes with standardization, you kind of end up starting to teach everything toward the diploma exam. So I guess I grew up in Alberta. I took the diploma course when it was 50%. But I don't know what teaching would be like without it. Like, I'm trying to think of if there was no diploma exam, how did you teach differently, or did you?
I don't think I taught particularly differently. The program of studies was the program of studies.
Yeah.
One thing I learned pretty early on, and I can tell you the mantra of the people that are the diploma examination managers, just teach the program. The exam's going to be there. That's fine. You will probably have to, obviously you'll give the students sample multiple choice questions. You will have them work with resources or sources. You'll have them do compositions that emulate what the composition is going to be like in a diploma. That's fine. But bottom line is just teach the program. Build in your students the confidence that they can go in there and deal with that exam, that they're not going to be overwhelmed by it, and free them up to go. A couple of the horror stories I heard over the years about this. One was, he was a colleague of mine and a good colleague, good friend, but I totally disagreed with him. He was, at this point, it was Social Studies 30. He gave the students an essay a week to do for 5 months. The diploma essay, every week they had to do a new diploma essay. Now, this is on the old exam, so there was the position paper. So they did essentially a position paper a week for 5 months. Well, probably 4.5 months.
That's still
and
18.
I said, you're out of your mind. I said, and any number of reasons. I think that's insane, but we disagreed. We agreed to disagree. I just said, I just think that's overkill. I said,
it's a person who loves marking.
Well, to begin with. And then the other one was, and this was when I was already no longer exam manager, but director of diploma exams. We had to deal with a very uncomfortable situation where, through means I won't get into the details of, we discovered that all the students coming from one particular class to one particular school, their essays were virtually identical. Every student had the same position. They used the same examples. They used the same sort of opening to their essay, the whole bit, to the point where we had to investigate it because we really did wonder, was this cheating? Was there actually cheating going on? We were able to look at it and determine, no, there wasn't. But what, again, without going into any detail, we ended up in a conversation with the teacher involved. And what became quite clear, the teacher intensely trained the students to say, if you get this question, this is what you're going to use as examples.
Kind of sounds
to
like me.
the point of, and this is what your position will be. Now, to me as a social studies teacher, excuse me, that was the most concerning part, was that the teacher said, this is what your position will be. Because to me, that was so much flying in the face of the logic of social studies.
Yes.
But the teacher's logic was essentially, social studies teachers generally are kind of left of center or centrist.
Yeah.
Make sure your position's left of center or centrist. So you.
Yeah.
And I just really begged to differ with that teacher in the discussions we had, and said, I know this isn't cheating. I said, but I think you're doing a disservice to your students on any number of fronts. First off, your stronger students are going to be constrained because they're told the composition will be 6 paragraphs. This paragraph will do this paragraph will do this paragraph will do this. Well, if you're a good writer, I talked earlier about the student who didn't need
the rough copy yet.
So now you've got a student that's told, I must make 6 paragraphs, and each of these paragraphs is going to be lockstep linked to the previous one. that might help and probably would help a weak student who's struggling with concepts. And it gives them a structure.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you say that, because recently, probably one of the strongest students I've ever had, they've come up to me and said, Mr. Clark, like the way that you teach us the position paper, when I go on and look at the exemplars online, it's a little bit different than the way you teach it. And I'm like, that's okay. It's like, it's not meant to be a formula. It's meant to be pretty much a guide. The fact that you're actually going out of your way to look at the diploma exemplars in your own time kind of shows like some sort of initiative, no pun intended with the prompt we just did from last year. But you're looking at, that's when you have those more elevated students that you got to be a little bit more flexible or fluid with the expectations of how they're writing it.
Well, for sure. And the problem is that your bright student is always going to be able to shine. They're going to be able to. And they can find some very creative way to do that. When you provide exemplar papers, the one drawback, well, there's probably more than one drawback, one clear drawback to them is students will look at them and say, that's the model I'm going to follow.
Okay, so would you almost maybe recommend not providing exemplars
No,
sometimes?
because I think for the sake of teachers and for the sake of students to some extent, you've got to show them to some extent what good writing looks like and maybe good structure looks like. I often would argue that don't show them the entire paper. I would show them excerpts from the paper and say, look, when it comes to expressing yourself, here's the satisfactory paper, a quote. Here's the excellent paper, a quote. Look at the difference in the writing. Or look, how does this excellent paper use the example? How does the satisfactory paper use example? So to me, if there were multiple years of exemplars, I'd pull multiple illustrations and bits and pieces from various ones and say, look at the common strand in these various exemplars papers over the year that got excellent. Now, they're not all the same, yes, but notice how all of them have very strong capabilities here or there or something like that. Look at the satisfactory papers. I would be very selective with my students now. I wouldn't show them a full example paper of excellent. I would simply show them excerpts. If you think about markers who come in and mark, one of the things that we do for them is we give them example papers, but we also have a rationale document which pulls excerpts out.
Okay, right? So kind of leaning more into the rationale section.
If you're going to do that for the markers, why wouldn't you do that for the students?
Interesting, because I've honestly, like, one of the crutches I've had is pretty much, how do you go about delivering effective feedback to your students? And I think that rationale, because sometimes I've actually started doing it where I'll pull names omitted and I'll do some like minor editing on each paper where I'll post on our Google Classroom a satisfactory paper and an excellent paper. Like, what did I give 100 or 95% or whatever, or an excellent, and what did I give an S?
Right.
And then I'll usually highlight certain parts. So I'm kind of doing the rationale model a little bit to be like, okay, well, we see these words insightful and adept and straightforward. Right. Well, how do they actually translate into how I measure what writing is? Right? That's a very difficult idea for students to grasp, that you can kind of measure writing.
And that's why I said I think showing them excerpts. And maybe one day you're going to focus on quality of language issues. Maybe another day you're going to focus on interpreting a source. Or another day you're going to focus on relationship among sources. In other words, you choose and say, look,
scaffold it a little bit more rather than just being like, throw an exemplar at you and be like, here it is.
Go read this full paper. A lot of students are going to, I'm not going to read it.
Yeah, especially a full paper. So one of the criticisms of the diploma exam that I often hear is it's not a concept knowledge test, it's a reading comp test. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's got to be an element to that. Every test is a reading comprehension test. Every test that the teacher gives their students is that. Every multiple choice question is a reading comprehension test. Every time you instruct in class, there's a listening comprehension going on. Comprehension is all. You've got to find some way to comprehend constantly. You're always, if you're going to learn something, it's to comprehending what's being taught you. And so, there could be the criticism that there's a certain element of reading in that. There is in the math as well. You have to be able to read mathematics.
And that's been the part where, like, the literacy pretty much should translate into social. Like, I don't see a reason why it shouldn't necessarily measure comprehension as well, because higher comprehension likely also means higher levels of articulation, hence being able to measure it at a higher level.
Well, and I would certainly argue, what's life going to offer you? If you say, well, the test shouldn't do that, well, is life going to give you that break as well? Are you going to walk out of a classroom at the end of grade 12, and if you haven't been measured for your ability to take documents and comprehend them and understand what's going on, how are you going to deal with life? Because you're going to have to deal with those things. And so, obviously we don't want, as much as possible, when you build a standardized test, you want to be able to do what you can to make sure certain constraints don't get in the way of the ability to be able to understand what the student truly understands. No question about that. In other words, you don't want to use unreasonably sophisticated terminology, for example, where it's really not necessary.
Yeah.
There might be a reason why you would obviously have to know the word bourgeoisie, maybe be able to read bourgeoisie, but it
at least like a general comprehension.
Yeah, but there might be other words in the stem of a question or in the writing task that you'd say, no, we better not use that word because there's no need to. We can find a more straightforward word. But we better use the word bourgeoisie because they need to know the word bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
So there's always that wrestling match.
Yeah.
But what you ultimately, yes, you don't want it to be that the sophistication of the writing is such that that's the only thing that's being measured. But to some extent, comprehension and understanding is going to be there. You're going to give them a cartoon. You're going to give them a quote. They're going to have to look at some point, perhaps at a bar graph. They're going to have to know how to do those things. That's fine. Because if you can show in programs of studies, that these are things that are important.
So how did political cartoons kind of come about? Because I remember being a grade 12 student and thinking the political cartoons were like, why are we looking at cartoons? That's often a response I get now. But I always say, like, we're kind of measuring your ability to think abstractly. Like, is that accurate? Is that kind of what the thinking was behind it?
Cartoons are often a very efficient and quick way to see a point that's being made.
Yeah.
And I think, we can't have the whole test one political cartoon after another. There could be some students who really struggle with political cartoons.
Yeah.
But it's, although, in the current context, memes and there's so many other things now that political cartoons aren't quite where they once were.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's still a means by which things are communicated in a very efficient and quick way. And I think you need to be able to understand that. Quite often on exams, and I really like doing a lot of wartime posters or other posters.
Yeah.
It was a similar idea. Okay, you could have a written half-page written on something, or you could have a poster. And can you interpret what that poster is communicating? What's the point behind that poster? What is it encouraging the public to do, or what is it telling the public is a danger, or whatever it is? Because again, people are going to, students are going to be walking down the street at some point and see something in a graphic representation they're going to have to understand.
Especially on social media now, it's all over the place all the time. You're pretty much always on autopilot and analyzing this stuff.
Yes. I think eventually when the diploma examinations go digital, which it looks like they're going.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts there of it going digital? Because
I
literally
think it's fine as long as it's a
session.
very controlled and measured and properly researched process. You don't just all of a sudden leap into it and start doing that as a means of testing, because if it's not being done at the school and all of a sudden it's being done on this 30% exam, that's got its potential problems. The idea that all of a sudden now you could be watching a 15-second clip of Hitler speaking at a Nuremberg rally and then get some questions on it is very appealing. It really is. I mean, it really can change. It could be a bit of a game changer. And if you go look at the
I never thought about that, like digital sources.
Yeah, I mean, very easily now. Instead of watching, responding to, like on a written assignment where you have to respond to 3 sources, all of a sudden now you're looking at this clip of Roosevelt talking about the New Deal, and now all of a sudden you're looking at this clip of Hitler opening up a new Autobahn, and you're looking at a clip of Stalin at maybe some hydroelectric projects unveiling or something like that, right?
Yeah.
That's all great, but that still requires the psychometrics to be in place.
Yes.
There's a whole bunch of things have to fall into place. So we don't necessarily want to do something like digital testing simply because it's the sexy new way to do something.
Yeah.
We want to do it because it's an effective way to deliver it and it's fair for students to do. So my concern would be if the government jumps onto a big bandwagon about this and all of a sudden is doing it and getting out ahead of the teachers and getting out ahead of the students. Interestingly enough, in my university course, when I mentioned this just this last fall, a lot of the students moaned and groaned at the thought of a digitized test. They were going, oh no, many of them would say, oh no, I'd far rather keep the good old idea of a paper and pencil test.
Yeah.
So, and these are much younger people than me, and yet they were still seeing some potential
risks. Well, because another criticism is always like, well, it only measures your reading and your writing, not your listening,
Right.
and kind of the other main kind of.
Right.
I know there's like the 6 main kind of avenues of like being assessed, but that is another way to kind of add some more variety for the different types of people with different different sets of like stronger skills in different areas, right? Yeah.
If you go look at the grade 3 tests that are on Alberta government website, and I've lost the name of them, not provincial achievement tests for grade 3s. They're sort of they are a much more digitized version of a test.
Okay.
And even though the grade 3, don't look at it for the content, look at it for what can be done. So kids are watching little film clips, they hit a button and a narrator comes on or a little video comes on the whole bit. So that kind of stuff is very appealing to me. And apparently it's been very engaging for the kids who do these tests. They're quite engaged by the test. But you don't do it purely because you can show a video clip. You do it because it's another means by which you can achieve something. So on those tests now, they can test listening skills more, right? So they can test reading, but now they can also test the student listening. So they can watch a little video. And now they don't have text. They have the video, and they listen, and they look. And now you can ask them questions on that looking and listening that you couldn't before, because before you really could look at a still, or you would look at some text or something.
And I'm surprised it actually hasn't happened sooner. Only because like every training video that you do anywhere is always like a person giving some sort of 30-second clip, and then you answer 4 or 5. Like all the safety ones are always like that. So I've never really understood.
Yep. No,
I hate doing those tests, but I mean I can see the merit in kind of changing it up a little bit.
I think that so. Bottom line is, I think the idea of digitized diploma examinations with animation in them and all that it's inevitable.
Yep.
But as I said, it's got to be managed properly. It's got to be researched properly. It's really got to be rolled out carefully. And the current managers might have some trepidations about them right now because, boy, it's different. It's very different.
All right, so I have one more question to ask you, sir. So I usually end off every episode with the similar kind of question. Is that I know you have a very in-depth knowledge of like the standardized testing realm, but even when you are teaching, and you are teaching now, the question is, education is what remains once we forget everything that we learned in school. So what is it that you want your students to take away from your time with you specifically as a teacher that's not just like based on the program that you're trying to deliver them?
And that quote you give, I use in my course when I talk
all right.
What's the big ideas? It's this thing I do in my course. And it's almost that quote. It's almost that idea that education is what remains when you forget everything you've been learning. I think that my goal for those students is for them to understand that they will never stop being a learner. So when they go into class or when they go into a school, or if I was to go into a school and I was to ask the principal of the school, how many learners does the school have? And if the principal said, well, there's 340 students, and I'd say, well, that's not what I asked. I said, how many learners are there in the school? And the principal said, what do you mean? Well, are your staff still learning? Is the custodial staff still learning at their trade? Are the support staff still learning? Schools are filled with learners. Everyone in that school is a learner. So I think I really want my students to understand. I've tried to convey this to students at various times. I'm still learning. I'm teaching the course at the university better now than I was 14 years ago when I started teaching it. And every year, I think I'm teaching it better. In fact, I've told my students, when I feel I'm no longer doing a better job, I'm going to quit because I've peaked. I'm not going to get better, and it's time for me to go. I was a better teacher every year when I taught high school than I was the previous year. It's sort of my mantra is...
How do you define better for yourself?
Well, boy, that's a tough one. I guess I'd have to say more effective in being able to see learners come out who are a better product from what I've done for them.
Effective is the word I've been kind of thinking too.
It really is. I mean, I'm quite comfortable that a lot of the, in the university course I now teach, a lot of those people who are going to come out of that course are going to have been greatly benefited by the fact they were in my course. I really have to believe that, and I hope that's the case. And I've sort of had feedback to that sense that's how they feel about it. So I think, to me, as a teacher, you have to continually always be a learner. You're always learning the trade. You're learning how to do it better. And again, I've told students, and sometimes students ask a question. I say, look, how would I know? I've only been teaching for 40-some years.
Well, and like, what do you kind of make of, sorry, I guess this is another question, but what do you kind of make of like the recent kind of exodus of teachers?
No, sorry?
Like the recent exodus. Like it seems like teaching is a kind of scrambling for teachers all the time, whereas
I
15 years ago it was the opposite.
Exodus. I think there's always a recent exodus. I think,
okay.
I mean, 20 years ago we were talking about the fact that there's a lot of people don't stay in the profession beyond about 5 years.
Yeah,
50%
leave, yeah.
A 5-year number, and that seems to always have been there. I think there's always an exodus. And I mean, to some extent, some of that will be people who really realize this isn't for me. And that's fine. That's going to happen. I came to that revelation about being a truck driver in the summers when I was trying to earn money to go to university. This isn't for me. I am not going to be. I had
a similar experience.
To be a truck driver my whole life. That was it. When I started teaching, it could have easily been an exodus for me after my first year. It was a nightmare year. It really was.
Why?
Well, it was. I was teaching grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12. It was a non-semestered school, so day one I was teaching all those grades. I was teaching like 7 or 8 different subjects I'd never taught before, and I looked and said, I got 10 months of this, and up till 2 a.m. and the whole bit. But I stuck with it. Now, not everyone will stick with it.
Yeah.
And teaching is a job.
So what made you stick with it?
I think a lot of it was I felt good about the product that was coming out. I really felt that there was a lot of students who benefited from that. I don't think and I also was pretty stubborn. I didn't think that. I didn't think that my first year. I left my first year, probably of any year, the most dubious maybe about whether I was going to stick with this or not. It was a very tough year. But by about the end of my second year, third year, I started saying, this is a pretty good gig. I can do this. It's tiring. It really is. It was exhausting. But I just felt better and better about it. And then I guess I just kept seeing ways I could do it better. And I wanted to put those things into practice, right? Yeah. And maybe that's what kept me going. And it certainly is what keeps me going to some extent even now. I mean, I'm getting up there in years. And I don't have to be teaching at university, but I just find that it's a reason to get up in the morning. It's great to go into a university class and be at my age, and students still think you've got some credibility and are worth listening to.
I know, and I say to everyone, I'm like, I know I'm only a couple of years in, but I just already can't fathom this idea of like retirement. Like I'm just like the idea that you're gonna like reach an end point and then not want to do it anymore, especially where you said you felt like you're getting better every year. So I feel like it would be very strange. I think someone, they said there was an author. They were 81, and then someone asked them. They said, "Why do you still write books?" He's like, "Why would you retire from something that's worth doing?" And I just thought that hit me so like, if you find something that you're kind of feeling, like why would you like it's not really work. And my kind of presumption of teaching so far is that it's not necessarily difficult. It takes a lot of time.
It takes energy.
It takes a lot of energy, and you're exhausted, and like you're kind of always, even what I've noticed, even when you're not planning or marking, you're thinking about it.
Yeah, constantly.
And I'm like, I don't even know what I used to do with my free time. Yeah. I don't know what my weekends used to be there, where I wasn't like washing my hair in the shower being like, oh, maybe I could do that lesson. Yeah. It just becomes a part.
I can't look at almost anything without seeing a potential resource for just in holidays in Morocco.
Yeah.
And 4 nights in a row I had teaching dreams. And I haven't taught high school for nearly 30 years.
Okay.
And I still have teaching anxiety dreams about high school.
What?
Yeah, where I will wake up and say to my wife, I was teaching a class of high school kids. I had no lesson plan. I didn't know what I was going to do. It was awful. Or some variation of that, where the kids aren't listening to me. And I'm not kidding when I say I still have those dreams. Nearly 30 years since the last time I taught a high school class, I still have those. I'm not in control. Things aren't going well a little bit, and that's I don't know. I'm not. It would never be silly enough to say that's post-traumatic stress. It's not. It's simply that's still in my mind.
Yeah, well, and I always find it funny, like doing practicums, like you get those feelings of just like, it feels like someone's pouring water down your neck, like the shock, and you're frozen, you don't know what it is, and I can relate to that a little bit. I don't have that so much anymore. There's the occasional time.
You could be having it when you're 66 years old.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you.
Beautiful.
This is great.
All right. Hey everyone, thank you all for tuning in. Really do appreciate it. Just wanted to say again, if there are any issues with professional conduct and or you would like to share your own story, experience, or have something you would like to contribute to the show, please do not hesitate to reach out at lucasrdclark97@gmail.com or send a direct message on Instagram to @MrClarkAfterDark. Hope you all enjoyed, potentially found something of use, and of course, please do not forget to subscribe. See you guys all next time. Unless you're scared.